Awesome. Well, Robin and Janet, thanks for coming on today. I'm really excited to just dive in with you all around and for people watching us, uh, emotional intelligence for school leaders. And one of the things just in my personal mission and my background in education and the work that my company does today is I had reached out to Robin because I was like, Robin, this is it. Like this is what I'm committed to and we're committed to doing. So really excited to just hear from both of you as you co-authored this and really talk about the idea of what that actually means, being an emotionally intelligent school leader. So before we dive in though, I do ask every person and every group that I speak with this one question around my podcast name and my company name. It's called Come Home. And so when you hear the words come home in your own personal experience, in your background, what does that actually mean to you?
What a great
Immediately to
question.
me, it,
Go
it,
ahead.
it means I'm back in a space where I'm safe and I need
Mm,
to be. And with like minds, yeah, that's where it comes to me right away. Free
mm,
association.
I like
So
that.
for me, two things come up immediately. The first is coming back to myself,
Mm,
just that place inside of me that is my truth, and just taking a moment to gather. And the other thing that it reminds me of, there was when my kids were little, there was a video that where the song was "Mommy comes home, she always comes home." So
Oh,
hear that
wow,
phrase, I think about going home to my kids.
yeah.
that's so
Yeah,
cool.
I love it, right? There could be the physical manifestation of what it looks like and also the internal. And I think too, when we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, it's those two things that coexist, right? It's how well are we cultivating it here, but also knowing that it's got to actually show up and go into the world.
It's
Uh,
a book you have to write, Griffin.
all right, I'll take some notes on that.
Yeah, come home
But
and show up. I like it.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
I love that. Cool. Okay. So I want to, and before we even started to hit record, we were already kind of just diving into this dialogue. And for people listening and people who are following along, one of the things that I'm talking about a lot or starting to get curious about, and we were starting the discussion, was this idea of embodiment, right? What does it actually mean to embody emotional intelligence and all the different layers to that? But one of the things I want to ask each of you is when it comes to an emotionally intelligent school leader, what does that actually mean? How would you describe who that individual is?
So Jen and I were talking about this earlier, and for both of us, and details to come, but we think of someone who embodies this work in leadership in a school
Mm,
as an emotionally intelligent school leader. So,
mm,
and it's very much like we were just talking about in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, the person who can come home to themselves,
sure.
and also the person who can show up in a certain way
Mm,
in the hallways, in the faculty lounge, in a call with parents, just coming from bringing your inner truth out, but with mindfulness,
mm,
being deliberate about how you speak and speak your truth, being kind, being gracious, being patient, and being aware of where you stop and start, and where the other person stops and starts, being aware of the people you're speaking to. And Janet, add to that.
I love that what you just said about where you stop and start and where others
yeah.
do. I mean, I think that's the labeling of that is really our self-awareness and our social awareness, right?
Mm,
And how, we're constantly, it's almost as if you're in a constant state of listening to your own self-talk
Mhm.
as
mm,
you are going through your day and being aware that that life is about me and everyone else that's here, and that my job as a school leader is to make sure that ultimately young people are learning and they're safe, right?
mm,
And in an environment that's safe. And so in order to do that, I have to be aware of myself and everybody else that's in that organization. And that's a big job. People don't think about that aspect of leadership, which is why there's a distinction between somebody who's emotionally intelligent and someone who's not, somebody who's really what we say authentic and somebody who is not. And an authentic person is self-aware. So
And
there's a
add
lot.
to that self-awareness, I'll just jump in, if
Yeah.
you don't mind, and say that piece, the self and other piece, being aware of how you impact others and how others impact you.
Mm,
And it's so important. I'm so glad you brought up that self-awareness, other and self, because most of the time we hear people complain, she's so annoying. Like
mm,
I can't work with her anymore. Why I wish he would just get it together. And so the focus is on how you're feeling in relation to someone else and who they
sure.
are, how they're impacting you. But what about the way you're impacting them? What
Mm,
about thinking about, am I lifting their spirits every time I see them? Am I acting in a way that they have space, where they feel safe, where they can come to me with questions or complaints or ideas? And that's the piece that I think is so important, because when you, well, it's equally important to think about how they're impacting you, but what are you doing? How are you showing up in that relationship?
yeah. Yeah, I think, just taking what you guys are talking about, right? I think a lot of leaders focus on the other people, right? They focus on the students, they focus on their teams, the teachers, the parents, everything goes outward, right? And that's what a lot of traditional education has kind of prepped leaders to do, is focus there. But what I hear you guys talking about in terms of the self-awareness, the social awareness, the understanding of truth, it's like you have to have a really good sense of what's happening here, because you're influencing and impacting everything outside of you. And to me, that's that's that differentiator.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
you're the model for how to do it.
yes.
Mm,
So
And
you're,
what I want to add, I'm sorry, Robin, I didn't want to step on your words, but I did. But because I think that the piece of that you have brought to our work is that, with her background, with Robin's background as a psychoanalyst,
yeah.
it has brought to our work that deeper understanding of the psychological nuances that happen in our daily lives, and particularly in the daily lives of a leader. And that's something that's not in training. That is
Yeah,
not something that one gets in, the classic educational administration class at all.
sure.
And yet, as a leader, and what we have heard from the people we've worked with as well as experienced ourselves, is that that's what makes the difference between being successful and being effective and not.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to me, and Janet and I like to tell the story that when we first met each other, and I was asking her, well, what is the training in psychology or in emotions for an aspiring leader? And she said, there isn't any.
No.
Right. There's
Yeah.
Yeah.
no,
And that was astonishing to me. It's also one of the
Yeah.
reasons that I moved from psychology and practicing as an analyst exclusively to getting involved in education, because I had children and I knew that my children were in somebody's class, right?
Yeah.
And my children were in a school led by somebody. And did those people have training to deal with the psychology of
Yeah.
students and their faculty members, and the communication and the days that they're on, how to keep them on, the days that they're off,
Sure.
how to help them get back on.
Yeah. Yeah, there's those worlds need to live together because they're one and the same, right?
yes.
And everything constantly through an academic lens or a societal lens lives in these different kind of silos.
You're
And what we learn through experience, and I think the incredible work that both of you have committed to doing and collaborated on is really this proactive approach to it, rather than us continuing to go through these experiences to go, oh, wait a second, there's a gap here, there's something missing, or we're still getting the same feedback, but don't worry about it. We're just going to keep going along.
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely. If there's ever a pocket in educational development, leadership development, it would have been the area, I think, of group dynamics, which really is coming more from the psychological perspective. And most people, I would just say there's not necessarily a comfortability. So it's taught through a cognitive aspects, not through experiential, if it's taught at all.
Yeah.
So yeah,
What were
it's a
you
big
thinking about for the group dynamics, just in what you were saying right now?
Well, I'm thinking, for example, if I go back to my own preparation, I did not get any of that in my regular courses, but I remember taking a class because I was interested in group dynamics and saying to myself, oh my gosh, this is really what we need to be teaching leaders, because it's how to manage groups and how to look at it's
Sure.
everything we're talking about. But again, it was only done in the cognitive way. But there were simulations where you put yourself into experiential mode. And that's the least gave in those classes. I remember thinking, wow, I'm really thinking about my own perspective and what's going through my mind, as well as what's happening with others. And so there are windows, but just Griffin, as you said, there's silos. There's organizational psychology, for example, a wonderful area. But again, if you're going to become an organizational psychologist, it's all disparate. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because I was thinking about the different groups that we've trained
Yes.
for years, and groups have a personality, and they have an emotions are contagious, so you can
Sure.
get a feeling of what a group is like when you or what a school is like when you walk through the door. Janet and I were just talking about one of our school and leader who is near and dear to our hearts, as many of them are, Dr. Dawn, who ran a school, the Thurgood Marshall Academy Lower School.
Okay.
She's an assistant superintendent in that same district. And when you walk into Dawn's school, you feel a hug. She pipes classical music in the hallway. People greet you with a smile. There's warmth everywhere. There are meditation corners. And she's built that culture because of her embodying emotional intelligence, not only in her person, but in bringing it to all the spaces she's in.
Yeah, I wanna take that, Robin, because one of the things in my experience, and one of the things when I look at a school culture and climate, and really to your point, right? You walk into the space and you just feel it. It's because from the top all the way through, it's existing, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot that I feel like also have this gap where it's, let's bring this to our teachers, let's bring this here, right? As a school leader or as an administrative team or the district office, whatever that be, we don't really need to play a role in this, because we need to give it to the people who go boots on the ground to the students, right? So I want to ask you, to your point, why is it so important that leaders embody emotional intelligence? And in your backgrounds collectively together, what has been that process like to really shine the light on leaders needing to do the work?
Wow. So that's a double header, right?
Sorry.
No, that's
I
okay.
can jump in say a few things, and then I'll leave it to you, Janet, since that's been your work for so many years. But if you don't own it and you can't do it and develop it for yourself, you can't teach it, and you can't. So, I mean, that's just a very simple answer why it's needed. And the other thing that I'll add is that our own work in the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence started out as a curriculum just for students, and it wasn't as successful as we thought it would be. Why was that? Because we needed to train the adults. And so we began to train the adults in the system, including the leaders. We realized the leaders needed to buy in. The leaders needed to set the tone, set the stage for this work in their schools. Janet, take it.
No, that is the bottom line. Actually, it really is. But, we know that second to teachers, it's the leaders who have the most influence on young people in their schools. And it actually happens through climate and through culture. And so if that's where it has to happen, then if you have a leader who is not emotionally intelligent and is not focusing on these particular skill development, et cetera, then you're just not going to have that sense and that feeling that Dawn gave, that Robin talked about, that you walk into a building and you can just feel it, right? The embodiment, as we would, where we started, of all of this. And I think that even Castle, when they began their work, it was all about studying the science behind the programs that develop children in these areas, right? This is where the science began, and it was very important that it did, because to move anything in education, we have to be able to impact academic achievement.
Sure.
That's, as we all know, is the bottom line in education. So why would people put money and invest in leaders when that's not the direct output? But the reality is, without that development, it's not going to happen. So for
Yeah.
us, when we started our work, even in New York City, where we were fortunate to have the support of the then Chancellor Carmen Frani at the time, we knew, and we worked with Dolores Esposito, who was the executive superintendent. It was all about getting the superintendents on board. We talk
Mm,
about the bottom up and the top down, but the reality is without that top down, that bottom up is going to take a long time to happen,
yeah.
right? And so that's where the work moved. When we started to have superintendents, they were trained, they were coached, and so all of a sudden their principals are now saying, "Whoa, look at this one and the behavior changes that we're seeing in this superintendent, and she could now self-regulate, and boy, she didn't care what she said before." And
Mm,
those kinds of things we began to hear happening, and more people wanted in. But it isn't a choice but for the leaders off the bat, because the money they want to spend on is going to be spent on kids, and understandably so. They don't see necessarily, unless they understand how this work works, how important it is for their own development.
yeah.
It's so true. And I think especially for veteran educators, for people who've been doing it for a long time, there's so much undoing that has to happen before they can do things in the way that are emotionally intelligent, right? And even for some people, and this was true of Dr. Dawn, whose name is Dawn DaCosta, our dear friend and colleague. When she was first learning mindfulness, she was thinking, why am I learning mindfulness
Sure.
to be a leader? Then, of course, the minute she was a leader, she realized I need mindfulness all day
Yeah.
long, and so does everybody in my school. But I think that just lost my train of thought.
Well, while you catch it, I mean, I think that people like Dawn, who have an internal understanding of what good leadership is,
Mm,
that see this and then say, "Oh my heaven, it was the missing piece," right?
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. So important. Such a key role, because that's how everything happens, kind of through this osmosis, right? We're talking about this embodiment piece. I'm curious, you keep using her as the example, and I know you guys have worked with a handful of other leaders and superintendents across the board. And so I'm wondering, have you been able to pinpoint certain beliefs or value systems or personality traits within these individuals that has really um,
Mm.
gotten them eager and excited? Or is this more coming from hey, this is what we're noticing in some of our data as a school, how can we be better? Just curious.
So when you talk about belief, I remember where I was going before,
Okay.
and it was to Bonnie Brown.
Uh-huh.
Bonnie was a leader who believed that she had to personally not only embrace the work she was bringing to her school district. She was the superintendent of District 75, which was, is that correct, the largest district in the city, or the largest?
It's the largest special education, focused on
Yes,
special
that's
education
right.
students. Yes.
Yeah, and so thousands and thousands of students Bonnie was
Sure.
in charge of, in school buildings all over the city. And when she brought the work of emotional intelligence to her schools and to her district, she was doing it herself, and she showed up at every single meeting. And so her belief was, leaders do it first. Leaders do it too. I'm there with you. I'm there for you. We're doing it. I'm your role model.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and I think about, other people who recognized, perhaps one of your questions is after this information, like, I'm really good at self-awareness, but I can't manage my feelings at all.
Sure.
Right? And so noticing things about yourself that
Mm.
maybe you want to be better at, maybe they're really in the way, maybe you're really great at at reading your own emotions, but you're not so great at reading facial expressions. And how do you know that? Because you say, oh, honey, you look so upset. I'm not upset. Or I'm so sorry, what are you talking about? I'm in a great mood. And
Yeah.
so you get feedback from the world that sometimes
Mm.
you're able to use to do something about it, yourself and your approach to it, and make it better for you and for them.
I want to add to what you're saying, Robin. And I think one of the things, I mean, again, this is anecdotal, but achievement orientation is an interesting competency that we find is very common in our really high-powered leaders who want to make a difference and make a change. Now, most people who are going to go, it's like they want to be the CEOs of the organization, whether that be at the building level, the principal, or whether that be at the district level. So there is this aspect of motivation and wanting to be the very best that you want to be. Now, that said, that doesn't necessarily include emotional intelligence, right? So
Sure.
there's another whole aspect that we're really getting at here. And so getting more into that realm, I would think that what we're also seeing is very high self-awareness on the part of these leaders that are willing to be introspective and look at themselves, so that they're looking at their achievement as not just their external self, but their internal self as well. And then on top of that, there are two others that we've seen come up in our data. One is empathy, and that is the ability to really feel what others are feeling, the ability to step in others' shoes. It's pretty big on emotionally intelligent leaders,
Yeah.
right? You have to work, you have to lead with empathy. So we've seen that as being common. And then the last area is self-management, obviously.
Mm.
So if you can feel this, you can see this, then we need to do something with it, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, and Janet, when you and I connected a while back, I think I had mentioned to you, I'm constantly in this space of really understanding. It's kind of this art of slowing down,
Mhm.
right? All of these little moments, all of these things are, how well can you create space in all of these little moments so that you can seek understanding, so that you can notice what's going on and really access tools then in that moment to go, okay, now here's actually how I take action on it. Here's what I can do with the information I'm given. And the other piece, Robin, that you mentioned just really stuck out to me. I'm like, podcast title name is Leaders Do It First, right? And so when the big thing that's resonating with me right now is, why is it so important? Because when leaders model it, it just, through osmosis, just gets to everyone. All of a sudden, students start picking it up, family and community start picking it up, teachers start picking it up, but you gotta live it.
Yeah. One of the things that occurs to me as you're talking, is that in order to bring this work, in order to develop yourself in this work, and in order to bring this work of emotional learning to your school, you have to have an emotions matter mindset, we call it. And during COVID, even people who would readily dismiss the power of emotions and in shaping your day and shaping your school couldn't help but take another look and say, okay, we can't ignore these emotions. Like, if we don't deal with them, it's just not going to happen for our school. People aren't
Yeah.
going to stand in front of a classroom. And I remember Brooke Jackson, who is another incredible leader and devotee of emotional intelligence in New York City and friend, was talking often during the pandemic about how emotions had to be first, that people couldn't just walk into their classroom. People were scared, they were uncertain, and life was unpredictable, and people felt destabilized. And so she had the idea of bringing everyone together as a faculty before the day started, giving people space just to be together with their feelings and to talk about them if they needed to, and get support, and to listen and be there for others, and then go about their day. And that was priority. And there were many leaders who began to feel who we spoke to began to feel like, wow, I knew that relationships were important. I knew that communication was important, but I never knew how important. And then up to the times that they were communicating with particular leaders in their district. And I remember Fran Rabinowitz, another wonderful leader, a friend and colleague, talked about that, how it was wonderful to be able to communicate with other leaders at that time. Because very often leaders don't have other people outside of other leaders to talk.
Yeah.
And so at a time where the world is going crazy around you, you need to have those connections. You need to have social support in order to stay stable yourself.
You know, it's making me think also, Robin, that article that we just worked on for the greater good. And in that, Robin was really thinking a lot and asking the question, well, where do they go? How do they get that space to reflect, right? And looking at the, you know, because it's not an easy thing. They have to consciously seek it out. And I know my husband, who's a former principal, would always say, well, truthfully, I have a really big bathroom in my office, and I'd go in there and close the door when I actually needed to get some time to think.
Yeah.
It's funny, but it's true.
And the supply closet is another weird place
Absolutely.
to go.
Where can you sneak off to for a couple minutes?
Where can you sneak off to? And how wonderful if you actually know about yourself, I need 3 minutes just by myself. And if the supply closet is the only place I can go, then hello, I'm using that supply closet.
Yeah.
But imagine if we realized as a field that reflective time was so critical for leadership development, but it's not. It's do this, do that, do that. Who needs this? Who needs that? That's the way the world is for the school leader. And so it doesn't provide that kind of space unless they choose it and they find a way to get it.
Yeah. And, you know, it made me think about when you were just talking now, I was thinking about years where I worked for technology companies where in these big tech companies, they were known for having abundance of food for people and technology gadgets for people, but they also had, because they wanted people, of course, to stay 24 hours a day, like little pods that people could escape into for like a little nap or a little thinking time. How amazing would that be if there could be those kinds of spaces? And many people do make them now. Many people convert like little closets to meditation areas or corners to meditation areas. So important, because sometimes our days, and probably every day, it's just one thing after another, from a parent call to a lesson that you're planning, to a faculty meeting, to your own work that you have to do, to the classroom itself. When do you have time to just be and to feel your feelings? And information, you know, your feelings are information. One of you said it before, and using that information wisely requires that you actually can identify what you're feeling.
Yeah, I want it. And what I think is just ingrained in society is just this idea of almost the celebration of, look at all the things I've done today, or look at all of the people I've showed up for. But as leaders, you experience extreme burnout. You start to experience even moments of resentment, right? And it's because we've never been taught, or we've never even had the shift in our perspective to, well, what if I'm actually full, right? What if my cup gets to be full? So I want to ask from a school-based standpoint as well as the individual, but if someone's embodying these tools or understanding themselves and knowing what they need, what's the actual impact of these skills on a leader and on a school?
So there's, I would say that more and more we're getting to that research, which is connecting the well-being of the school leader with the outcome or the output in terms of school climate and teacher and student effectiveness, learning. So I think that, you know, we're certainly the Yale Center has been working hard to get that data and to find the correlation between teachers and how teachers perform based on how leaders emotional intelligence is showing up. And
Mm,
so I think that's a really big piece that's out there. I think that we certainly over the years, Robin and I in our work have recognized exactly what you're saying, is how the school leaders are dying on the vine, so to speak,
yeah,
because it's a service-oriented profession,
sure.
and we don't think about the nurturing of our leaders. So it's a huge gap that's out there that we're trying to promote, and we appreciate your Come Home organization, so that we're getting the word out there that we have to have the health and mental health and physical health and psychological health of our leaders thought about and cared for if we want to be successful in schools.
Mm,
Well
Do you
said.
want to add to that?
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. And it makes me think about the coaching process that
sure.
we co-created, and how caring how much we wanted to show people that they need to be cared for as
Mm,
leaders as they were exploring themselves, so that built into the process really was time for them to walk into a space and develop a relationship. So the length of the sessions, like an hour and a half each,
wow.
was really hard for people to carve out. You can imagine, right? When does a leader have an hour and a half? And sometimes they couldn't do it, so it would be a little bit shorter. And that was such a gift and such a luxury. And just for leaders to sign on, be willing to say, you know what, that would be so cool if somebody could just listen to me.
Yeah.
Right. And to have somebody help them to unpack anything they wanted to unpack, and for them to cast a vision, and somebody to be there to support that and scaffold that through the agency of their, and anchored in their, rather than the agency, but anchored in their emotional intelligence competencies. How are you going to get there?
Yeah.
Yes, you can get there. Let me help you. How are you going to get there?
So Robin's making me think about our dear colleague, Richard Boyatzis from Case Western School of Management. And we love his work, and Dan Goldman's work, and Mark Brackett's work. And we've infused all of that work into our work because it's just high level work.
Yeah.
And Richard talks often about the parasympathetic emotional attractor of the parasympathetic side of the brain, as opposed to the sympathetic side of our nervous system.
Mm,
And one thing, and I'll never forget this, because Robin early on would say, we would have this conversation, and she would say, we have to have them dream first. We have to have them envision first. And I'm coming from the educator. No, 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 no. We need to, we need to have that vision set out. We need to. No, she was right, that when we allow that reflection time, and we allow the
yeah.
parasympathetic, which is the calming side, and as opposed to imposing and the nervous system getting all geared up, and stress being more stress producing, and fear coming up, and anxiety, then we can really have change happen. I mean,
Mm,
that's a very big piece that people aren't necessarily looking at. So you don't get more out of someone who's working harder and always on top of everything. Well, you get more out of someone who can sit back, somebody who can reflect. That's where creativity comes in.
yeah.
That's where inspiration comes in. And I'm thankful to Robin, and we've learned a lot from each other, I think, over the year, which is why we're
Sure.
such great colleagues and friends. It's a process. We have to be open to learning how to do things differently.
Yeah, these are everything that you're talking about, right, is a skill set. It's a muscle.
It is.
And it can be utilized very intentionally. It'll either be forgotten about, or we won't utilize it in a way that actually serves how we want to show up, or a way that it works for us, because we actually don't know what to do with that time or whatever. But what I'm hearing you guys talk about is this real intentionality between these little gaps of reflection and space and time to really access these really critical and important things that, one, maintain and take care of them and empower them, but also directly impacts the people around them.
Yeah. For sure.
Yes.
And a lot of what coaches would tell us is that their clients initially were like a little uncomfortable. Well, what do you mean I have to dream my vision? Or what do you mean I should use crayons to color it in? And yet it was those moments where they broke through that boundary of discomfort and could find something really interesting, or maybe really got into their picture. And many people tell us that what they envisioned actually came true.
Wow.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, because it gives us, and Robin, you had mentioned it before, it gives us kind of this truth to ourselves, but then also these pillars and these guiding principles that ultimately we get to step into and we get to align with. And so when it comes to decision making, when it comes to all these different things, we don't need to sit there stuck. We know what we can do to move forward because, oh wait, that's aligned with my best self, that's aligned with the person I want to be, or what I believe in, or what I want to advocate for.
And I think also that coaching and our model gives people the opportunity to engage with the deeper questions about who they are,
Yeah.
rather than a superficial conversation just about, well, what's your next lesson? Like, what are you teaching
Sure.
this month? And not that those aren't important. Of course, you have to spend really important time developing those lessons to move your faculty along, to move your students along.
Sure.
But what about, like, why are you doing this to begin with? And where do
Yeah.
you really want to go? And how much more engaged you can be in those important conversations if you have an hour and a half for someone
Yeah.
to listen to you. Like when you're running past somebody in the hallway, catch you later, how you doing? There's not room for that. And leaders, most people don't make that time for themselves, but certainly leaders, many of them don't even have that time, even if they want to make the time. So that stretch to let me move things out of the way so I can make the time that I know I don't have, because it's so important, has been really rewarding to see people doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It kind of, like, I was even just writing down because, right, when we got into this conversation, we were kind of looking at high in the sky the concept and idea of embodiment,
Mhm.
right? But deep reflection and real engagement with self, kind of coupled with, Janet, you had mentioned it too, like experience, right?
Yeah.
So then you put those pieces together. I'm sitting here going, that's when embodiment happens. That's
Mhm.
right when we have this deep space to dream and understand and really get to the core of ourselves, and also take action and experience things. We start to get feedback and information, right? That's in without any research to ground it in, just in my own kind of process of it. To me, it's like that's a great opportunity to really embody this.
Mhm.
It's no, I was just gonna be brief. I just was thinking of, in some ways, when we talk about self-actualization,
Mm,
um, that's something just to throw out there because, and for everyone that may happen at a different time in their lives, not necessarily age related, although we do say wisdom comes with being seniors. But, but I think that that process of looking at self and becoming your best self, as we're talking about, is a
yeah.
very critical one to encourage. Robin,
Mm,
I'm sorry.
I was just thinking that we all are and have been researchers our entire professional lives.
sure.
That may not be quantitative research, but we've been looking at people, and the three of us and many of our colleagues have been spending a lot of time thinking about, like, what is that about? And
Yeah.
how can we get more of that and less of this? And
Mm-hmm. It's a good point.
Yeah. Um, It is, right? We're all interacting in the world. And one of the pieces too that I'm constantly reminded of in these conversations and talking about this idea of emotional intelligence and how it translates to schools and individuals is we're constantly on this journey of finding connection and meaning with what we're doing,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
if we don't have connection and meaning, we're ultimately going to be disconnected from whatever that is. And so that's constantly resonating with me too, is like, can we know enough about ourselves to be able to find meaning to show up and do what we do every day?
Yeah.
I think that is so critical, Griffin. And Robin and I were actually talking about that for another piece we want to write soon. And it has to do with our purpose, right?
Yeah,
Our why, if you would, Simon Sinek's work.
sure.
But, our why, our purpose. And when you first go into education, I will say that as a young teacher, you're going in because you want to change kids, you want to help kids, you want to, a lot of it's that. And then, over time, you find your space and your place and where you want to go and how you want to influence. And I think that, oftentimes people lose it. They become more transactional than they become transformational, certainly in terms of their leadership and their own self journey. So I think you're right. I think that's part of what we provide for them is that ability to revisit. When they're looking at their vision, they're looking at their purpose, they're looking at
Sure.
where they want to be. And I couldn't agree more that that is a very critical piece. And then once they have that, it's the collective that they have to influence to be able to find their purpose and their meaning.
Yeah.
And I think in this world where there's craziness around technology and social media, and there's craziness about fake news and alternate facts and gaslighting, and it's sometimes an effort just to come home. Sometimes an effort just to feel like stable, like what's going on. Okay, I'm making roast chicken tonight and asparagus and carrots, and I got that, right? Like I don't have to apply to something online where I can't find the form, or I've signed it twice and but I can't do it, and the DocuSign is to come, and then maybe I should use ChatGPT to help my kid with his homework. And like we're living in a world where change is happening very rapidly, and where we don't trust a lot of what we're being told and what we've seen. And we have war in the Middle East, and we just turn off the channel and go about our business. And I mean, it's a very anxiety producing time, very destabilizing in many ways. And so this work where people are encouraged to just come home. I love that. To come home to themselves and see what's going on.
Yeah.
Before they then prepare to engage with the news, engage with the technology, engage with others. Is just so critical. And it's so heartening to see that more and more schools and more districts and more organizations are picking it up. Kind of have to, because people are hurting and their well-being needs to be elevated all over.
I want to ask both of you, kind of building off of that, Robin, if our prep world, if our leadership academies, if our graduate work, doctorate work, undergrad work, all had components of what you're talking about to equip people with these skills to enter the field of education. Just dream with me for a second. What do you think education and what do you think that whole landscape would look like if people actually integrated into the field already with it? Because I think what our world has realized and what I'm committed to doing and you guys have done for so long and are doing incredible work is we're coming back to fill a gap here, right? And I think we have enough research now, and we have enough people who are trying to collaborate and come together to go, no, we got to fill some of these gaps and be proactive so that the next generation, so that all these things. So in your dream world, if everyone had this, what would happen on the other side in terms of what education may look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Wow.
Well, I'm not sure I know what education would look like, other than lots of conversations and time for reflection and pausing and deep questions. But I think in terms of what people would feel like, people would feel the safety in being able to give themselves permission to feel, and having others, which is the name also of Mark Brackett's great book, having others give them the permission to feel, and giving others the same. People would have the space to be creative, as Janet was saying, you know, to be able to access a part of themselves that they wouldn't normally access without that pause. People would be more curious learners in that space. And I think people would feel the kindness of those around them who were embodying emotional intelligence while they were teaching. And there'd be as much learning going on as teaching, learning with. I guess, Janet, it makes me think about learning communities that you always
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah, you're right. There would be true learning communities around this, as opposed to just around a curriculum area. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the key things that, you know, we are so focused because the role of schools has traditionally been to improve academic achievement, although we now have all the data to show that it's all about social, emotional, and academic achievement.
Sure.
So the data is there. It's just a matter of catching up with that data and putting the emphasis on the right syllable, right? We're not quite there yet. And so schools would look very different, because you could imagine if you had leaders who were coming out of our shops, like Robin was at Columbia and I was at Hunter College. And for many years, that's what we did. It was, and if you look back at many of those leaders now, that's the Brooks, it's the Dawns, it's the people who were very much with us right in the early days and continued on their own journey and path. Well, if people are doing that, then you're bringing that into the center of the space. And if you bring that in, you're going to start shifting the way things are happening. So you're no longer going to have toxic cultures, cultures where people come in and they just do the job and they shouldn't be in there in the first place. You're not going to have, you'll still probably have unions that they're important in a lot of ways, but also for many administrators, it's tough because you have teachers who don't want to be there really and shouldn't be there. So all of those kinds of things that we just put up with would start to shift. We wouldn't be able to tolerate that if our purpose was different. And we knew that the collective would change and there would be a true transformation if everybody was on this path, as opposed to just one or two people in a school building.
And you'd feel like you belong to a greater good.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for that. Thanks for that reflection. And you know, I've always lived in this idea in this world that like anything is possible. And I think a lot of just what I try to bring myself to every day is committed to that. And I hear you guys talk about these pieces, and you know, people may laugh, but I sit here and go, I'm a firm believer that that will happen. Like that will happen. There are the people that are actively doing this work and really committed to it. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the work that you're doing as you're building those stepping stones and helping people reach everything that you just described. So I appreciate it. One thing I want to do, I always ask people at the end of our conversations this one question. So I want you guys to answer individually, but I want to know just in your work, in your life, who you are. If you could be known for one word, what would it be?
Can't be a phrase.
It could be a phrase.
I probably would say the power of kindness. I mean, there are other things as well, but
Sure.
if I have to pick one, I'll pick
Do
one.
you want to explain a little bit why kindness came up for you?
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, I can if I need to.
You don't have to.
But I just, I guess I'll just say that it opens people, that it allows for people to feel safe and to walk into a space with you. It creates possibility for connection. It creates possibility for creativity.
I like that.
So
Thanks,
my
Robin.
word, oops,
I was
Go
just
ahead, Janet.
saying, it feels good.
yeah. And I would say, Robin, knowing you, kindness is a very good word for you. And really being one of the most empathic people I've ever met on the planet.
Mhm.
So it's
So
very,
sweet. As
very
are
big.
you. As are you.
So my word, it won't shock you, Robin, is perseverance.
Mhm.
And I would say that I have felt that there is a purpose that I have, and that purpose has driven me through all my years in my career to continue to move this work forward. And so I'm very tedious about that. I don't stop that for 1 minute. It's a little bit too much, to tell you the truth. I've had to learn work-life balance and still learn it. But I would say that perseverance is my word, because we can't give up.
We can't.
We can't give up. We've
Mm.
come too far.
Yeah. Thank you guys for sharing. For people listening, and for people who are leaders within schools or in the education space, and really too, I look at it as just leaders in general, and people really trying to show up and really impact. Where can they find the book? Where's the best way for them to grab that copy?
I guess Amazon, right? Is
Amazon, and I guess Harvard Press.
Harvard Education Press. Yes,
It's
absolutely.
published by Harvard Education Press, so certainly there, but definitely on Amazon.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll make sure for people listening and tuning in, and I'll make sure I drop the link so that they can find it. And thank you guys again for just your commitment. I know you just touched on that, Janet, but both of you collectively, just your commitment to emotional intelligence, a lot of this work, and really being a voice for change, and fighting the time to keep pushing that forward. It's an incredible guide with so much wisdom, so much insight, so much story, but also practical things to go and do. So thank you for your time and your efforts doing this. And thanks for coming on my podcast.
Thank you, Griffin. Thank you for the work you're doing in the world and for promoting this kind of work.
And for sharing your work with us and giving us the opportunity for us to share our work with you and your listening audience. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All righty.